Welcome back to a Book a Day podcast, and we were discussing books on meaning of life. And I think it would be unfair if we don't talk about Viktor Frankl's book, Man's Search for Meaning, which is why I've kept this book for the final episode on this series, on the series of meaning of life books. I'm sure you know about the book and you know about the author, but just in case you don't, Viktor Frankl was an Austrian psychiatrist. He was also a Holocaust survivor, and he founded logotherapy, which is an alternative to psychotherapy, whereas the psychotherapy, it focuses on the connection of our suffering with our childhood, our previous experiences. Logotherapy focuses on finding the meaning of life and based on the choices that we have today. So it doesn't focus so much on the past, but it focuses more on present and future. And in his book, Man's Search for Meaning, there are you can say, two parts. In the first part, where he talks about his journey in the concentration camps and how he survived that. And in the second part, he talks about logotherapy and how finding meaning despite your circumstances can be achieved. And since I think most of you would have read the book, or I would like you to read the book, I thought what I would do in this podcast is I would pick another book which was recently released, recently translated into English rather. It's called Embracing Hope, and it captures a lot of conversations with Viktor Frankl as well as some writings by him on the same topic. And what I'm going to do in this episode is narrate to you some of those conversations in which he's talking about the meaning of life. So, without any delay, let me give you a glimpse of those conversations. What really happens when the interviewer asks him questions on the meaning of life. So here's one question. Let me begin. The question says that most of us have never been in concentration camp experience. We have never had to go through that horror and tragedy, so no one would think that today it would be easier to find meaning in life. And yet, I sense that it's more difficult, in a sense, today than it was in years past. Do you think that? And Viktor Frankl rather, he says, yes, that's correct. And the questioner then asks, why is that? And to which Viktor Frankl responds with, he says, because we are living in a society, either in terms of an affluent society or in terms of a welfare state as we have in Austria, are living in any way these types of societies virtually satisfy, or at least they are out to satisfy and gratify each and every human need, except for one need, the most basic and fundamental need operant in man, the need for meaning. Consumer societies, they are even creating needs, but the need for meaning, or as I call it, the will to meaning, remains unfulfilled. It is what I now call the unheard cry for meaning. On the one hand, society is frustrating man's will to meaning. On the other hand, psychology is neglecting this fact. If you go through the current motivation theories, you'll find scarcely any reference to what is the most fundamental and basic concern of man. Neither pleasure, nor happiness, nor power, nor prestige, but originally and basically his wish, his desire to find and fulfill a meaning in his life, or for that matter, in each single life situation confronting him. And if there is a meaning to fulfill, if he is aware, If he becomes cognizant of such a meaning, then he is ready to suffer. He is ready to offer sacrifices. He is ready to undergo tension, stress, and so forth, without any harm being done to his health. But if there is no meaning available, no meaning in his visual field, then he takes his life. I was recently confronted with the statistics from an American university regarding 60 students who had tried to commit suicide. They were screened afterwards psychologically, and it turned out that 85% told the doctors the reason for the attempt was that they could not find a meaning in life. And among them, 93% were psychologically and physically healthy, in good family relationships, in good economic conditions, and with satisfying academic records and grades, and so forth. So then the interviewer says that I spend quite a bit of time with young people in their teenage years, and a lot of them say they are just simply bored. They are bored with school, they are bored with their parents, they are bored with their life, and what? I guess you would say, what is the meaning of life? To which Frankl responds with, neither parents nor school teachers are courageous enough to challenge them. Don't arouse tensions, don't create tensions, don't put stress on them. But even Hans Selye, the man in Montreal who created the concept of stress, recently has published a paper in which he says stress is the salt of life. Man needs tensions. I would say more cautiously that what he needs is a sound amount of tension. Not too much tension, not too little tension, but a dosage, a sound, healthy dosage of tension, just such as that tension which is established in a polar field in which one pole is represented by a man and the other pole by that unique and specific meaning which is waiting for him to be fulfilled by him and exclusively by him. And then later on in conversation, the interviewer asks him that what about faith in God, belief? Is that required to find meaning in life? And he says, not really. That's not the only way to find meaning in life, but that's helpful. And then he goes on to say more about belief or faith, which I am going to narrate here. Frankl says, belief or faith must grow within yourself organically. You have to let it grow. You just should not contribute to the repression of faith. But in principle, each and every person can find a meaning in life. And this again has been empirically corroborated. I have at home a list of 17 authors, people who have written their dissertations on this subject, among them two, as it happens, from the University of Ottawa. And to sum up, what has been evidenced empirically by tests and statistics, as I said before, is that meaning can be found by each and every person, irrespective of his age, irrespective of his sex, irrespective of his educational background, irrespective of his IQ, irrespective of his personal character structure or psychological makeup, even irrespective of environment. Just think of Auschwitz, of prisons, and of people who are very successful and get bored. And finally, it turned out that meaning is available to man in principle, irrespective of whether or not he is religious, and if he is religious, to which denomination he belongs. And remarkable enough, the last findings I mentioned, for them who are indebted to priests who were empirically making research in psychologically university departments. Then the interviewer lays out a question for him. Let me first narrate the question and then I will go to the answer by Frankl. Interviewer says, let's explore just for a moment how we find that meaning. Let's say that I am just an average sort of chap. I have never been through the concentration camp, so I have not been tested through suffering. For example, I live a very comfortable life. Perhaps I don't have a belief in God. Maybe I'm bored with my job, and maybe I'm bored with my family. But you say I can still find meaning in my life, and it's important to find it. Where do I find it? What do I latch on to? I mean, I'm just suggesting we may have viewers who are going through this. Frankl says, I have already elaborated on this many times. There are three main avenues, as it were, leading up to meaning fulfillment. The first way, the first road on which you may arrive at meaning to find and to fulfill is through work, through creating a work or doing a deed. Second, through love, through experiencing someone in his very uniqueness. And this means loving. Love is more than just sex. On the contrary, human sex is more than mere sex, precisely to the extent to which it serves as a bodily incarnation. I may say a mode of expression, the physical mode of expression of one's love, of a personal togetherness, of getting hold of another person in his very uniqueness. And seizing the uniqueness of another person is equivalent to, is the very definition of love. And you may enrich your inner life also through experiencing something, culture, nature, art, or whatever. Through research, through experiencing something or encountering someone in his very uniqueness, in other words, through love. Work and love are the main avenues leading up to meaning. But if need be, if you are confronted with a fate you no longer can change, if you are confronted, say, with an incurable disease, with an inoperable cancer, even then you may find a meaning. You may even find the deepest possible, the highest conceivable meaning, because you then have an opportunity to bear witness to the human potential at its best. The most human of all human capacities, which is to turn a tragedy into personal triumph, to turn your predicament into an achievement on the human level. In other words, life is potentially meaningful literally up to one's last breath, to the last moment. Even in extremis and in ultimis, as the theologians would put it. This means in extreme life situations. Just think of Auschwitz and up to the last moment. Let me quote no more or no less than the title of Elizabeth Kubler-Ross' latest book, Death, the Final Stage of Growth. So, life is potentially meaningful under any condition. The American Journal of Psychiatry once wrote up a review on a book of mine, and there you will find this sentence. Dr. Frankl's message is the belief, the unconditional faith in the unconditional meaningfulness of life. Right, but it's more than faith. When I was 15 years of age, I got this glimpse, this insight, just intuitively. But lately, it has been corroborated on firm and solid empirical grounds through factorial analysis of many thousands of questionnaires, of subjects being screened psychologically, the data being computerized, and so forth. So, this is not something philosophical suspended in the air. These are solid facts, and these are burning problems, problems burning under the fingernails of our youngsters. So we can find meaning in three ways, asks the interviewer. Through work, love, and potentially in suffering. And Frankl says, only in suffering if need be. You remember, I said if need be, to shoulder one's cross unnecessarily, to endure suffering which is unnecessary, this does not yield any meaning. If you can change a situation, you will have to. If a cancer can be treated with surgery, you have to undergo or perform surgery. But after all, man is a mortal being. We have to die, and before dying, we have ineluctably to suffer sometimes. As a medical doctor, I must confess this. So there is certainly no one is spared unchangeable situations. Who is spared unchangeable situations? It could be perhaps for a couple of months unemployment, and still life retains a meaning. In the 30s, at the time of worldwide economic crisis, I dealt extensively with youngsters who caught in unemployment situations, and I found out that unemployment itself is not what was weighing heavily on their souls, but it was the mistake they had fallen prey to, the mistake that having no job means having no meaning, means being useless. And the moment I had these youngsters turn to some organizations such as Father Tom's Youth Corps and so forth in order to work as volunteers, for example, they had a meaning to fulfill, even without getting 1 cent, and the depression was gone. In other words, what we need, you see, is not bread alone, and what the unemployed need is not welfare alone. They need a meaning, and a meaning can be found everywhere in the smallest hut. On the other hand, you find people who are millionaires and billionaires and they have no meaning. They kill themselves. My former assistant during a teaching period at Harvard, Rolf von Exterberg, showed in his dissertation that people 20 years after graduation from Harvard, having made wonderful careers, being very successful, did not find a meaning in their lives. And on the other hand, I can present to you heaps of letters which, due to unknown reason, I always get from American prisoners, letters to the effect, only here in prison, a few hundred yards from the electric chair, I have at last found meaning in my life, only here. And even more, people say, I'm happy, I have made peace with myself and my life right here in prison under these conditions. So that now we might understand how I was justified in saying that meaning can be found irrespective of the environmental situation of a given situation. It depends on yourself. And it depends on whether or not you are exposed to an indoctrination on American campuses or an analyst's couches. An indoctrination to the effect that man is nothing but a mechanism, that man is nothing but the outcome of conditioning or psychodynamic processes, that man is nothing but a computer. If you indoctrinate people along these lines, small wonder if they are purged of any enthusiasm or idealism. I recently had to address as guest speaker the annual meeting of the International Pen Club, the International Club of Writers, Novelists, Playwrights, and Poets. And I implored these authors of novels and dramas and so forth. I implored them, if you are not capable of immunizing your readers against nihilism and despair, please, please at least refrain from inoculating them with your own cynicism. So that was a brief conversation with Viktor Frankl, and I'm not going to read or narrate much of the book that is the first one, Man's Search for Meaning. I'm not really going to do that because I really want you to read it. I want you to read it and find meaning in your life. Whatever you do, whatever your circumstances are, whatever your situation is, I don't know. But even if it is very difficult, as we saw in this conversation, that you can find meaning. You can find meaning even in suffering, if that is the only option we are left with. Other than that, of course, there are other options. We can find meaning in our work, through love. There are other options. But even in suffering, we can find meaning. And that's really the fundamental philosophical idea of Viktor Frankl. So with that, I will conclude this theme on the books on the meaning of life, and I'll continue reading more books, exploring more books, and discussing them with you, and sharing all the wisdom that they have on some new theme next time. So I'll take your leave now, and I'll catch you in the next episode with a new theme, with a new set of books. Thank you very much for listening. Thank you.